Scientists have made a groundbreaking discovery, the bones of what looked to be a new human-like species. They're thought to be more than 3 million years old, and officials say the find could change the way we think about our ancient relatives.
For over 500 years, the Aztecs were remembered as builders, warriors, and visionaries. But new DNA evidence is exposing a truth far more unsettling. Scientists tracing ancient remains across Mexico have found genetic patterns that don't just rewrite Aztec history.
Well, wait a minute.
Those are teeth, guys.
That's some kind of
Jawbone. Yeah, I saw that. It looks, there's more bones there.
They reveal a system of control more ruthless than anyone imagined. What they uncovered wasn't just conquest. It was replacement with a trace of human blood. Stay with us to the end, because the real story of the Aztecs is far darker than legend ever told. Let's begin with the discovery that started it all. Bone that exposed the Aztec secret. Scientists excavating graves in Tlatelolco unearthed a single cracked bone, small, fragile, and easy to overlook. But when they ran its DNA, the results didn't just challenge history, it shattered it. Inside that fragment was a genetic code that tore through centuries of legend, exposing a truth the chronicles never dared to record. This find will go on to unravel one of the most famous origin stories in the Americas and force historians to question who the Aztecs really were. The story everyone had learned was simple. A proud people from a legendary northern homeland called Aztlan traveled south, built their capital in the Valley of Mexico around 1325, and rose from humble wanderers to an empire of god-kings. It sounded perfect, too perfect. But the bone unearthed told another story. From 27 skeletons buried in a ceremonial site, scientists managed to extract mitochondrial DNA, the genetic trail passed down only through mothers. If the legend of Aztlan were true, the samples should have shown a clear, uniform lineage. Instead, the results were a tangled web. About 65% of the remains carried haplogroup A, a genetic signature common among many indigenous groups. But mixed within were haplogroups B, C, and D, markers linked to people from the Gulf Coast, Oaxaca, and even northern Mexico, where older civilizations like Teotihuacan had once ruled. This wasn't a single tribe migrating south together. It was a collision of peoples, cultures, and bloodlines, proof that the Mexica didn't rise in isolation but through waves of contact, conquest, and assimilation. The myth of one pure, chosen people suddenly cracked wide open. As the data spread across research labs and conferences, new questions surfaced. If the Mexica weren't who history said they were, what happened to the cultures they absorbed? And worse, what did they erase to become what they did? The vanished city of Xaltocan. When scientists decoded the DNA from an ancient island city called Xaltocan, they didn't expect to uncover one of the darkest genetic disappearances in Mesoamerican history. At first, everything looked normal. There was a thriving island city, buried beneath layers of clay and stone. But when the DNA results came back, they revealed something no one could explain. The people who had once lived there were gone, not moved, not absorbed, but wiped out, their genetic signatures replaced by strangers. Before the Aztecs rose to dominance, Xaltocan was the proud capital of the Otomi, a powerful civilization that ruled the northern shores of Lake Texcoco. They were builders, traders, and farmers who had carved out a bustling city and busy markets. For generations, their city had flourished until 1428, when the Mexica and their allies from Texcoco and Tlacopan invaded. Historical records claimed the Otomi were peacefully integrated into the empire or relocated elsewhere. But science told another story. In 2012, researchers from the University of Texas, led by Dr. Deborah Bolnick, analyzed mitochondrial DNA from 25 skeletons unearthed on the island. Some belonged to people buried before the conquest, others after. The contrast between the two sets was chilling. Earlier remains carried haplogroups B2 and C1, the unmistakable genetic signatures of the Otomi. But after the conquest, those markers almost vanished. In their place appeared haplogroups A2 and D1, lineages linked not to Xaltocan but to the Mexica heartlands far to the south. The shift was too abrupt to be explained by intermarriage or migration. Within a single generation, nearly 70% of the city's maternal ancestry had been replaced. It was as if the women of Xaltocan had simply vanished, leaving behind no trace of their bloodline. To the scientists, it felt less like assimilation and more like a quiet purge, a rewriting of the city's genetic identity under Aztec rule. And when researchers compared their findings with DNA from nearby settlements, they saw the same haunting pattern repeat itself. Xaltocan was not an isolated case. It was the first clear sign of something far larger, a calculated erasure hidden beneath the grandeur of empire. If Xaltocan's people could vanish that completely, what about the others the Aztecs conquered? The next discoveries would reveal that the disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a system designed to rewrite an empire's very root. The hidden purge that rewired an empire. As more ancient DNA samples were analyzed across the former Aztec Empire, the pattern repeated. Local bloodlines vanished, replaced by families tied to Mexica heartlands or allied northern groups. The scale of this genetic disruption goes far beyond normal assimilation or migration. Researchers now call it demographic replacement. In other words, entire populations were erased and substituted, creating a human patchwork under imperial control. The logistics alone look impossible. Replacing a city's genetic identity requires moving thousands of people across mountains, lakes, and valleys. This wasn't just conquest, it was systematic population engineering, what some scientists are calling genetic colonization. The empire wasn't simply taking land, it was actively reshaping who lived on it. The deeper researchers dig, the more unsettling the story becomes. Millions of lives were affected, their ancestral lines erased, leaving gaps in both the historical and genetic record. And here's the twist. The Aztec origin myth of a northern homeland, Aztlan, may hold a key. The DNA hints that this migration wasn't just legend. It may have been part of one of the largest coordinated population movements in pre-Columbian America. The DNA pointed to something deliberate, something calculated, but who exactly was behind it? The answer lay deep within the Y chromosome, the genetic signature of the fathers who did the replacing. The coalition hidden in their blood. Just when scientists thought they understood the Aztec story, the DNA dropped a bombshell. The mythical homeland of Aztlan might not have been mythical after all. It could be the missing link to one of the largest population shifts in pre-Columbian history. The deeper scientists dug into the basin's genetic wreckage, the stranger it got. Beneath the maternal turnovers that wiped out entire bloodlines, a new signal flickered to life on the Y chromosome, the father-to-son trail. And what it revealed wasn't just migration. It was a secret army stitched together from scattered worlds, proof that the Aztec rise wasn't born from one people, but from an invasion coalition so mixed it almost defied belief. See, while maternal DNA told the story of who was replaced, the Y chromosome showed who did the replacing. This strand passes only from fathers to sons, a kind of living barcode of ancestry. When researchers mapped Y chromosomes from ancient remains around Tlatelolco and compared them with modern descendants, the pattern cracked the old myth of a single Mexica tribe marching from a northern paradise called Aztlan. The data instead pointed to a genetic storm, dozens of lineages colliding at once. A study of over 500 men from central Mexico found something no one expected: staggering paternal diversity. Around half carried the QM3 marker, the same ancient signature that runs through native peoples from Alaska to Chile. But nearly as many bore its older relative, QMEH2, along with rare offshoots like QZ768, QL663, and QZ780, strands linked to northern desert raiders, Toltec survivors, and migrants from far beyond the Mexican plateau. The sheer variety wasn't normal drift, it was a shock wave. That shock hit right when the empire exploded, between 1325 and 1450, the same centuries when local lineages vanished from the basin. the number of distinct Y chromosome types jumped by nearly 40%. The timing was too perfect to ignore. It further confirmed that this wasn't one clan expanding. It was many bands fusing, probably Chichimek war groups from the north, merging with valley survivors to form something new and unstoppable. And that's the twist. The Aztecs weren't a blood-pure nation. They were a living merger, a genetic alliance built on necessity and conquest, held together by power, not heritage. When scientists traced the Y chromosome patterns across central Mexico, they realized the empire had done something no civilization had ever done before. But what exactly did they do? The empire that rewrote its own bloodline. When researchers decoded the Y chromosomes from across central Mexico, the data revealed something terrifying. After every Aztec conquest, entire male bloodlines didn't just fade, they disappeared. Within a single generation, fathers were replaced, lineages were reset, and the genetic map of a nation was rewritten as if by design. The deeper the researchers looked, the clearer the pattern became. It wasn't just about war or tribute anymore. It was biological control. The same regions that lost their native male lines showed sudden spikes in a specific genetic marker, QM3, a signature of the Mexican military elite. The ratios were amazing. 3 Mexican men for every local father. That imbalance didn't happen by chance. It pointed to a deliberate system designed to overwrite bloodlines. Historical records showed how it might have worked. The Aztec Empire didn't just demand crops and gold, it demanded people. Families, organized into tight-knit groups called calpulli, were uprooted, forced to relocate hundreds of kilometers away to populate new lands. Men were marched as porters, women and children loaded into canoes that crisscrossed Lake Texcoco and beyond, while overseers kept count like inventory. Tribute lists in surviving codices suggest that the state tracked these population quotas the same way it tracked maize or textiles. But how were all these movements possible? With no wheels, no pack animals, and no rest from the demands of the empire, thousands died along the way. Archaeologists have found evidence of mass burials on trade routes and isolated mountain passes, bodies dumped where exhaustion or disease took them. Those who resisted didn't just disappear from records, they disappeared from the gene pool. In several regions, entire maternal lineages vanished, their mitochondrial DNA replaced by new arrivals within decades. By the time the empire reached its peak, the genetic landscape of central Mexico had been rewritten. Each conquest didn't just expand territory, it erased ancestry. What looked like cultural unification on the surface was, at its core, a slow, organized dismantling of entire bloodlines. And here's the chilling part. The genetic echoes of that system still linger today. Ghosts in modern Mexican blood. When scientists began testing modern Mexicans' DNA, they didn't expect to find the Aztec Empire still pulsing inside it. But that's exactly what the data revealed. The same genetic patterns that marked forced replacements centuries ago are still shaping the DNA of people alive today, showing that the empire's reach didn't end with its fall. It survived in blood. In 2025, new genome-wide studies across central Mexico found that most modern populations carry only 20 to 30% ancestry from the pre-Aztec peoples, the Otomi, Acolhua, and others who once ruled their own valleys. The rest of the genetic mix comes from the Mexican coalition that replaced them. It's a huge shift, one that confirms the empire didn't just dominate politically, it rewired the population itself. These findings aren't theoretical. Today, when someone in Mexico City or Puebla swabs their cheek for a home DNA test, the results often light up like a history lesson written in their chromosomes. A trace of Otomi ancestry might survive through one grandmother's line, but most of the markers point back to the Mexican heartland, the same regions responsible for the genetic floods that followed conquest. The empire's biological footprint never faded. It just blended in so deeply that no one realized it was still there. But this inheritance runs deeper than identity. It affects the body itself. Geneticists studying immune responses found that some of the same population shifts that erased ancient lineages also changed how people respond to disease. The Aztec purges may have wiped out certain immune traits and strengthened others, leaving behind genetic trade-offs that still shape health outcomes today. In some regions, resistance to tropical infections is unusually high, but vulnerability to autoimmune disorders has risen with it, a hidden legacy of selection through conquest. And then comes the emotional blow. For centuries, the Aztec Empire has been celebrated as a symbol of indigenous pride and resistance. But if the DNA tells a different story, one of absorption and erasure, what does that mean for identity today? Across Mexico, communities are wrestling with that question. Some see strength in the mix, a people forged from survival and adaptation. Others mourn the voices lost in that merger, the vanished languages and bloodlines that never recovered. The DNA doesn't lie. Beneath the flags, the festivals, and the pride, every cell still remembers what the empire did and who disappeared to build it. But as these findings spread, they didn't just rewrite the past, they ignited a war in the present. The debate that followed would divide academia like never before. The genetic war that split history. The discovery that the Aztec Empire may have engineered its population exploded into a full-blown academic war. In one corner were scientists led by Dr. Deborah Bolnick, whose genetic studies suggested the Aztecs practiced something far darker than simple conquest, a deliberate program of population replacement. In the other were historians and archaeologists who called that claim reckless, accusing the geneticists of turning bones into propaganda. It all reignited after Bolnick's May 2025 paper dropped. Her reanalysis of remains from northern Mexico's Casas Grande region found the same pattern seen in Xaltocan: massive mitochondrial DNA turnovers that couldn't be explained by random drift or decay. The data pointed to intentional demographic control. Clans moved, families split, lineages replaced. To Bolnick, it was evidence that the Aztecs, and even their Purepecha rivals, used relocation and selective resettlement as a tool of empire, controlling people like they controlled tribute. But not everyone agreed. Veteran archaeologists pushed back hard, arguing the samples were biased. Many elite burials survived better in the humid tropics, meaning the genetic record leaned toward conquerors' graves, while commoners' bones, the true majority, had long decayed. They warned that DNA alone couldn't tell the full story, that trade, assimilation, and cultural blending could explain much of what looked like replacement. The debate quickly spilled beyond academia. By October 2025, YouTube channels and podcasts were buzzing with heated takes. Bolnick's findings versus her critics' outrage. Some argued that if her theory was right, it explained why Hernán Cortés met so little resistance centuries later, because the Aztecs had already fractured the region through forced relocations. Others accused her of projecting modern guilt onto ancient empires, calling the term genetic imperialism sensationalist. The fight has split experts worldwide. One side sees the Aztecs as cold strategists who mastered demographic control long before modern states did. The other insists this interpretation erases the resilience and agency of conquered peoples. What's at stake isn't just scientific pride, it's ownership of history itself. If Bolnick's data holds, the empire once hailed as a symbol of indigenous strength may stand as proof of how power rewrites blood, identity, and memory. And the most unsettling part? The next excavation could prove one side right or bury the truth all over again. Tomorrow's DNA and the Empire's final secret. Something strange is happening in labs around the world, and it's bringing the Aztec Empire back to life in ways no one thought possible. For a moment, let's forget ancient bones. The newest genetic breakthroughs of 2025 are pulling DNA straight out of soil, sludge, and air, rewriting everything we thought we knew about how far the Empire's reach really went. In October 2025, a flood of new results began connecting the dots. Environmental DNA, fragments of genetic material preserved in mud and water, is now revealing traces of Aztec-era populations in places where no graves were ever found. In the remnants of Tenochtitlan's canals, scientists detected genetic signatures linked to the QM3 haplogroup, a lineage long tied to central Mexican populations. What's shocking is how those same variants are turning up hundreds of miles north along ancient trade routes. It suggests the Aztecs didn't just rule by sword or sacrifice, they spread through bloodlines, moving people and genes across Mesoamerica like living cargo. By mid-year, more bombshells hit. A July analysis hinted that pre-conquest migrations were far more chaotic than history recorded, populations shifting and mixing long before Europeans ever arrived. The picture forming isn't one of static civilizations, but of waves of movement, collapse, and renewal. Civilizations didn't vanish. They transformed, carrying pieces of one another forward. Then came the results that stunned even the skeptics. Whole genome studies of Maya and Inca remains showed genetic overlaps with highland Mexican populations, hinting at shared migration strategies and possible Aztec influence spreading far beyond their borders. Even the famed Maya collapse now looks less like extinction and more like a demographic remix, continuity blended with outside ancestry. And now, a new frontier is opening. Early California dig sites are revealing maternal DNA markers that trace back south, possibly closing the mythical Aztlan loop, the homeland the Aztecs claimed to come from. If verified, it means the migration story wasn't a legend at all, but the record of a people who once moved across an entire continent. AI-driven tools are now mapping isotopes, gene flows, and ancient diets with astonishing precision, exposing a genetic fingerprint that keeps leading back to one truth. The Aztec system of engineered movement may not have been an exception. It might have been the rule. The question scientists are now asking feels almost personal. If the empire leaves its mark in DNA, how much of it is still in us? If the DNA from soil, air, and water can still expose the Aztec Empire's hidden manipulations, then maybe we've only scratched the surface of how far their reach went or how much of them still lives in us. The empire may have fallen, but its code endures, whispering through every cell it touches. What do you think about these shocking DNA discoveries? Do they change how you view the Aztec Empire and its legacy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you want to be here when the next chapter unfolds, hit subscribe and stay curious. The story of what comes next is already being written. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.